Our project that we decided to do is about designer babies. Designer baby is a baby whose genome has been selected or altered, often to include a particular gene or to remove genes associated with disease. The topic of designer babies is not new, as the first designer baby was developed in 2000, but has become more prevalent in today's society due to the technological advances that have been made in this field. As you can see, there's a little cartoon right here that's just making fun of designer babies as a couple is trying to pick and choose if they want a tech tycoon or a tax lawyer. Recent developments. In November of 2018, Chinese scientist He Jiankui developed the first genetically modified babies that were resistant to HIV. This caused a lot of controversy, although it should be seen as a bad thing because who would want to have a child that is susceptible to such a harmful disease? Although many do not view this means of nothing modifying genetics to be ethical, Jiankui believes that in 2 years' time, ethical means to be genetic modification will be achieved, though he does not mention how he believes this will happen. In the next slide, you can see a family tree where you can see the different people who are affected by PKU. Controversies. The controversy surrounding the topic of designer babies stems from an ethical standpoint. Many will argue that parents have bodily autonomy over the embryos, while others argue that the genetic of an embryo should not be altered as they do not have a say in the process. There are also arguments that parents control the environment the children grow up in and raise them to the way they would like, and that the altering of their genes is taking being an overprotective parent too far.
The next slide shows the genetic modification of babies. It's just like a poll, basically, that shows the opinions of adults in the U.S. And what they think about using genetic modification to make the baby more intelligent and to reduce the risk of serious diseases. And it's obvious that they think a majority of Americans think that you're taking it too far if you do this. This next picture, it shows the characteristics that parents wanted to change the most with genetic altering, like genetic modifications. So, and then it shows the standpoints of people. So the savior sibling, so Adam Nash, born on August 29, 2000, was conceived using preimplantation genetic diagnosis, PGD for short, to donate blood to his older sister. His sister Molly was diagnosed with Fanconi anemia, which is a genetic disease which causes bone marrow failure. When trying for a second child, the parents and doctors decided to genetically test the embryos to not carry the disease and also produce enough tissue to match for a bone marrow transplant. So Adam basically was conceived to save his sister from her disease, which is why he was named a savior sibling. So PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, allows scientists and doctors to genetically test and study the embryos to prevent certain illnesses from the parents. This process includes IVF, which is vitro fertilization, and the selected embryos are implanted with no faulty genes. Regulations. The regulation of the option for using PGD is determined by each country's government. While the United States federal law does not regulate PGD, Austria and Ireland are some that prohibit the use entirely. In other countries like France, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, PGD is allowed, but strictly for medical use only. The selection of embryos based on sex is not permitted, only in certain circumstances where a genetic disorder would take place. So if the genetic disorder would only be prevalent in a male, then you could choose to have a female child instead. The future of designer babies depends on the use of genetic modification of the embryo. In some cases, parents could take genetic modification to the extreme by choosing genes they deem superior. For example, a family could choose to have a baby that appears with lighter skin or taller so they could have an advantage in life later on. While putting your child's best interests at heart is not a bad thing, making a child who would have been darker skinned to be lighter skinned is inherently bad because it reinforces the idea that light skin is superior. It is hard for scientists and legislation to determine the line that should be drawn because ethics and morality are often circumstantial. Gene therapy. Another option to get rid of the faulty gene is gene therapy. Gene therapy is a technique that inserts genes into the DNA to treat or prevent the disease they inherited. This allows doctors to use the process instead of using surgery or drugs. There's different ways that researchers have approached this method. The first one is replacing the mutated gene with a healthy one. The second one is inactivation of the mutated gene. And the third one is introducing gene to the body to help it fight off the mutated gene. Gene therapy is still under study to make sure it is effective and is currently only used for diseases that have no cure. And then this diagram shows how the genome editor works, which is the genome editor works, which is the CRISPR. So it shows the whole process. And then the last page is just our works cited.